And Seek and Destroy, as always, this is Ian Trottier for Discussions of Truth. Today we're opening up 2 hours prior to the 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, only because the second hour will be hosting Bandy Lee, Dr. Bandy Lee, that's Bandy X Lee of Yale University. She'll be talking about, we'll be talking about the curious case, the dangerous case, rather, for Donald Trump. This will be her technically third time joining in the program, but it will be her second officially. We'll be starting, and at the 5 o'clock hour, we'll be having Gerald Posner, three-time New York Times bestselling author. We'll be talking about his latest book, Pharma. That is Pharmaceutical Industry, Lies, Greed, and the Poisoning of the American People. That's not the official title, but that is the title, more or less, and that will be the discussion here heading into the 5 o'clock hour, which is the regular slotted hour for this discussion of truth that takes place. We will next week be hosting Temple Grandin, who has overcome autism to achieve illustrious academic career, more or less, for someone who has autism. She does have a doctorate, and she currently works at Colorado State. And we'll be opening up next week with Mary Hennon and Dr. Michael Hall again. They will be discussing the Dr. Fauci situation nationally regarding the coronavirus. We're going to start today with the protests, of course. These ridiculous protests that are going on. This is the 8th day now nationally for them, and we'll be bringing in Brian Knowles and JP Linstroth for this. So let's go ahead and right now, without any further ado, bring in Brian Knowles. And I'm phoning in Brian right now, and then we'll bring in JP. Again, this is Ian Trottier for Discussions of Truth. Phoning Brian Knowles right now. So this is the right number for him.
You've reached the voicemail box of Brian Knowles.
Okay, so he did not answer that call. Here we go. We've got a different number for him. Bringing in Brian Knowles right now. School District of Palm Beach County, African American Studies. Bring in Brian Knowles. We got to put him on hold and then tether in JP Linstroth after we get a hold of Brian. Wait for that. Oh, okay. Let's see here. Okay. Let's see here. Bring him in via Skype, actually. Okay, hold on. You know what we're going to do here is, let's see here. See if we can actually add. Hold on a second. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Let's see if we can bring in Brian via Skype.
Hello?
Yes, Brian, Ian Trottier here, Discussions of Truth. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good. How you doing, Ian?
I'm doing fantastic. Let me take a moment. I'm going to put you on pause, and we're going to tie in JP. If you just hold on a moment.
No problem. Thank you, man.
Brian, I'm going to hang up on you, and I'm going to call you back. Pardon the
Okay.
pardon this.
Nah, no problem. No problem.
Okay, again, just trying to tie in these loose ends here. This is Ian Trottier for Discussions of Truth. And so to give you the background here, the signal is faint, so I'm actually on a Wi-Fi connection. So what I'm doing here is communicating with JP, and JP will be contacting Brian, and then I will thread. Once the two of them are connected, I will then bring in JP. Again, and this is your first time listening to the program. JP Linstroth is a former Fulbright scholar to Brazil. He's got a PhD from Oxford. Brian Knowles is the head of African American Studies. Okay, let's go ahead and see if this works here. JP, can you hear me?
Yes. I don't think my phone allows for double calls, Ian.
Oh, it doesn't. Okay. Let me then call Brian back since he's got the two of you. Let me see if that'll work.
Okay. Can you do it like with your phone like you are now, or do you want me to hang up with you now?
Yeah. So Brian can't hear this.
He can't. No.
Okay. So I'll hang up on you, and then I'll try to plug in Brian from where I'm at and see if that works.
Okay. Okay.
Again, you can follow me at iantrottier.com. I don't edit any of this, so in the replay, you'll be getting all this technical workaround. But I apologize for that. It makes it more real, I suppose, doesn't it? Okay, so Brian Knowles. Let's see if this works here.
Hello?
Brian, it's Ian Trottier again. Do you have two-way? Is JP with you at the moment?
He was, but he hung up on me, man.
Oh, okay.
He was with me for a second there, and I got hung up on.
Okay. All right. Let me let me try this again here. All right. Just stand by here.
Okay.
Let's see.
No problem. No problem.
This should work.
Hello?
JP there.
Hey.
Brian, can you hear us?
Yes,
All right,
I
so
can.
oh, fantastic. All right. Brian, welcome to Discussions of Truth. As mentioned, this is host Ian Hamilton-Trottier. It's very nice of you to join us. JP has been joining the program now for probably close to 3 years, I suppose, JP. And JP, thank you for coordinating this. As listeners are listening to this, what we do know at the moment is we have transitioned from a international health crisis to a very urgent domestic crisis that really we can go back to Rosa Parks. We can talk about the efforts from Martin Luther King. One thing that sticks out in my mind is Rodney King and the malicious beating of that man in Los Angeles. I think it was in the early 90s. But we've still got this massive issue facing this country even after the beautiful presidency of the very diplomatic and professional Barack Obama. We have, again, this massive crisis facing the country, regardless of the major city that we are in. So, JP, I appreciate you reaching out to discuss this issue and inviting Brian. And Brian, thank you for accepting the invitation to join us. I have personally reached out to some other high-profile folks, but because of the short notice and scheduling, we were unable to include others in this. But I think we've got a nice small panel here to make a nice discussion of this topic. JP, listeners are familiar with what you do and what your work is. Again, JP's got a PhD from Oxford. He's a former Fulbright scholar to Brazil. He writes extensively on human rights. And Brian, would you please take a moment and introduce yourself for listeners? Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yes. So thank you for having me. I'm more than happy to join. I know it was last minute, but I definitely cleared my schedule to make sure I'm part of this conversation, which is critical based on everything that is taking place right now. My name is Brian Knowles again. Currently, I'm the manager of the school district's Office of African American, Latino, Holocaust, and Gender Studies. And what that job entails is that we provide curriculum and instructional materials to teachers around those subject areas. In addition to our work, and I assist the district with developing policy around issues of multicultural education and also diversity and equity. So matter of fact, our school district is one of the few school districts in the state of Florida that has an equity policy, which addresses issues around systemic racism, et cetera. And I was the one who was critical and key in helping write that policy. In addition to that, we make sure that we help support our teachers by providing professional development modules around teaching students of color, understanding, the variables such as like culture in the classroom and how that influences learning, and making sure that teachers are what we call culturally competent to address the needs of a diverse student demographic. Here in Palm Beach County, out of almost close to 200,000 students, 64% of them, and sometimes that number fluctuates, either Black and brown, Latino, Hispanic, or students who've come from the African diaspora. When I say African diaspora, we're talking about the diversity of our Black population here in Palm Beach County.
Fantastic.
So
well
that
said.
encompasses and it tells a little bit of what I do. So,
thank you, Brian. JP, did the article get picked up by Counterpunch? Can listeners find that article at Counterpunch?
Not yet. I mean, sometimes they don't publish until Friday, Ian. I just wrote another one called Malcolm or MLK about kind of the influence of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., which, Mr. Knowles, Brian's more of an expert than I am, but I felt kind of compelled to also write about those civil rights leaders and icons in relation to what happened with the George Floyd murder. And I don't want to overspeak, but I just think that a lot of these issues can go all the way back at least to the Civil War and before, obviously. And I think that in many ways, people are still fighting the Civil War today. just because that in 56 years since the Civil Rights Act in 1964, not a lot has changed as far as inequalities, unemployment, unequal education, and police targeting of the African American community.
Okay, yeah, well said. We've certainly have various cases of deliberate suppression of African Americans. We can look at. I'm thinking about one of my early childhood friends, and we still remain in contact. And his parents are from Alabama, and they are black as black. And he was one of my best friends growing up. We still remain in contact, and he's researched the Tuskegee Airmen and what happened there with the various testing. But we've got, and I think this is critical, JP. You were adamant about wanting to invite someone who identifies and represents that African American community that has gone through those struggles. I would assume that is you, Brian. Brian, JP talks about a civil war on various levels. JP, of course, and not myself. We don't have direct African heritage, so we are unable to speak from that viewpoint. So this is where you get the spotlight here, Brian. In your experience and what you understand is going on in this country, is this a type of civil war? What is happening? This is a major crisis. Please fill listeners in as to what you view is going on here.
How I view things that are going on, and I can do my best to articulate the voice of the black community, because I can't represent all black people and every viewpoint. But I can definitely articulate my perspective as an individual black man to probably even speak to the collective. And do I see this as a type of civil war? To some extent, to some of the variables that took place during the Civil War, as far as, you're talking about states and, making sure that we prevent the spread of slavery and industrialism and all those different factors that came into play during the Civil War. But there is a common thread here from the Civil War until now, because one of the things, that JP did mention is that some people feel like they're still fighting the Civil War, because I don't think some people, when I say some people, primarily the white supremacist sentiment and attitude is conceded to the Civil War, because that was what the Civil War was really truly fought on the basis of preserving and perpetuating white supremacy. So yes, we're still fighting that battle, even though we've had legislation, throughout the civil rights movement, and even subsequent, that have broke down some barriers. But you also have legislation that is still in place and systems that are still in place that perpetuate white supremacy and also upheld white supremacy and racism. So, and racism and white supremacy are definitely things that are synonymous. So yes, we are fighting a civil war, because we're still fighting to dismantle the remnants in the existence of white supremacy.
Yeah, which really appalls me, because like I said, one of my early, very, very close friends who I still remain in contact is a black man and received an actual name, an African name. That's his first name. Is an African name. So this type of thing, it does appall me that this is really going on. And we've got Minneapolis. So George Floyd, not knowing his background, I think he had roots to Houston. So he may have grown up in Texas. So either one of you can correct me if I'm wrong there. So Minneapolis, is this an institutional issue, whereas there is prevalent racism across the country in these policing institutions? Are we able to isolate it and say that there is a how do you view that? And again, JP, I want to get to you as well. But I want to, as Brian is saying on this, well, how is your view? Is this a people versus police? How do you view that? If we're able to categorize this as saying, yes, there's elements of the Civil War that are still continuing. It's a civil rights war that still prevails decades after the assassination of Martin Luther King. Is this a police department issue, or how are you viewing this, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes we see civil rights issue. It's a human rights issue. As it's it's a larger issue, and I don't view it as people versus the police departments. It's more versus people that versus white supremacy, and white supremacy is just playing itself out through the police. But it's a systemic issue that we're fighting against. It's not about individual police officers. It may appear that way because what happens is the media treats things and they're looking more at the symptoms versus the sickness. And the sickness is white supremacy. The sickness is racism. And we're looking at how things play out. So we're looking at battles and confrontations between people and police officers. And sometimes even the media kind of portrays and kind of focuses in on the looting and I don't like to call riots, I like to call rebellions, because some people are striking back at these systems of white supremacy the only way that they know how. So it just depends on perspective and how the narratives, I'm going to say, not perspectives, but narratives and how it's presented. It's presented, yes, it's people against police officers, but no, I think it's people versus white supremacy that is translated and being played out through our law enforcement system.
We go from the presidency of Barack Obama, cherished by many, as I mentioned, in my view, incredibly diplomatic and professional in how he carried himself and how he represented the people and carried the office that represents the republic. How do we go from a man like that, of course, representing two ethnicities and races in that sense, the human race, of course, but his mother being white, the father being from Africa. So he's representing those two sides. But how do we go from that, where we look at the epitome of perhaps what one can achieve academically on various levels, and then the epitome of what one can achieve politically, at least in the United States? We go from that to what we've got here with Donald Trump, which certainly doesn't, he's got his degree from Wharton, that's arguable, and he's certainly representing an elite, he's not only representing white people, it's hard to argue that he represents white people across the board. He's not representing black people in that sense, because he's an elite, wealthy, white American. But how do we go from Obama to Trump, in your view, JP?
Can I just interrupt a little bit? I just want to follow up with what Brian said, and I really appreciate his perspective. But before we get into Obama versus Trump, I think we really need to elaborate on what Brian said. And I think also what he's talking about is a systemic. It's a systems problem. It's a systemic issue for the whole of society, not just police issue, not just policing. It's a systemic issue in society, and Cornel West, who is now back at Harvard, he was at Princeton. Cornel West is a prominent African-American intellectual. Just like to quote with one of the things that he said recently in an opinion piece. He said that, and this is what he's talking about, a systemic issue in relation to the United States, that any society that refuses to eliminate or attenuate dilapidated housing, decrepit school systems, mass incarceration, massive unemployment and underemployment, inadequate health care, and its violations of rights and liberties is undesirable and unsustainable. And I think what we're watching here with these protests, and it is a white supremacy, and it is against racism, but it's a corrupt system, Ian, and it's a breakdown of the system in the way that it's set up socioeconomically against African Americans, but also against a lot of people that if we're electing millionaires and billionaires, we're not addressing healthcare issues. We're not addressing a lot of disparities within society. So I think that needs to be said, and I think that people are beginning to recognize that this is a systemic issue. But I'll go ahead and let Brian talk about the Obama versus Trump era.
Or Brian, if you don't want to address that, you can pick up from where JP just whatever you want.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to take both, and I try to be very careful of really expressing, because of my position of expressing my political views. But one thing I'm going to say is that, definitely, JP, that we're looking at systemic issues play out. Sometimes we need to kind of shift how we see racism, how we see prejudice and discrimination, and racism itself is not being just individual attitudes and is not confined within certain boxes like police officers, for example. Racism is something that's structured, something that is within, it's systemic. Racism is something that has barriers, there's obstacles that have been constructed to benefit one group of people and also be disadvantageous to another group of people. So if it was Obama, and we do see a sharp contrast in leadership styles between Donald Trump and also President Barack Obama. But both parties still represent or stood at the top of a whole lot of systems where racism was built in. And we have still not addressed, regardless of who's at leadership and who's in that chair, those same systems are very much alive. And that's what we need to start really focusing on, dismantling those systems of racism, and not our individual attitudes and mindsets towards racism, but where racism is embedded within our systems.
JP, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up with that. And what Brian is getting at, and I don't want to obviously put a word with what he's saying, but just enhance it, because as a social and cultural anthropologist, I've written a lot about structural violence, and I write about it in relation to mostly the indigenous people that I studied in Brazil, but also other people, even Guatemalan Mayas, who experienced racism in South Florida. And what we're getting at, and what Brian's getting at here, there's structures in society that are perpetuating violence in a lot of ways, because if you can't get the proper job, or you can't get the proper education,
right,
or you're not getting the housing that you really want and should have, those are structures of violence. It's structural violence is what we call it. And you can look at theorists like Pierre Bourdieu or Nancy Shepard Hughes, but that's what Brian's talking about. These are the structures in society that need to be dismantled, that are barriers of preventing, whatever group, whatever, if it's an ethnic minority or even with a different sexual identity, are not able to participate in society in a normal way, have a normal life, or preventing targeting or by the police or whatever it is. And that's really why I think that both of us are calling this a systemic issue.
So Lawrence D. Bobo, who chairs the W.E. Du Bois social science at Harvard, has recently published a graph, and that graph shows, I'm looking at it right now, since 1975, relative to what he's saying, inequality is due to lower ability among blacks, and that line decreasing in the past 40 years. He says the other line, inequality is due to lower motivation among blacks. That line remaining fairly steady. And again, listeners can find that. It's an interview that the Harvard Gazette had with Lawrence D. Bobo recently in regards to his research on the social sciences in black communities. So if we're relating what I think is being addressed here as a socioeconomic, maybe not necessarily a race issue, but a socioeconomic issue, and that and that communities like the more impoverished black communities, because like we're saying, Barack Obama was able to pick himself up. Is it harder for anyone, regardless of race, in a suppressed socioeconomic arena to gain traction in life? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, let me just say this, and I'll let Brian go. But if you don't have shoes, you can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? Number one. Number two, if you look at the statistics, black people are 3 times more likely to be killed by the police than white people.
Wow.
you can go through all these statistics.
Yeah.
You can look at COVID-19 and the disproportionate way that that disease alone and the health disparities, because people in lower socioeconomic status couldn't stay home. But
Sure.
there's a whole range of issues, and I'll let Brian discuss it.
Go ahead, Brian.
No, you definitely hit it. You know, when somebody's gaining traction and lifting yourself up by your bootstraps. And I'm going to use some historical reference to kind of respond to this question as far as how structural racism and systemic racism exists. That, yes, some of us as Black people, we gain some traction, but even the traction that we gain is never on the equal footing of our white counterparts in no shape, form, or fashion. And also in historical references, when there have been examples in the past when Blacks have been able to navigate through structural racism and being able to navigate and create our own self-sustaining communities which have been destroyed. There has been times, and there's so many examples when, there is, a lot of conservative talk that says about lift yourself up by your bootstrap. When we lift ourselves up by our bootstrap and you take the boot from us. So those examples would be, we always relive in history, but, we look at 1921, actually 2 days ago was the 99th year anniversary of Black Wall Street, of the massacre of Black Wall Street, of the Greenwood massacre, or the Tulsa, what they used to call the Tulsa riots, but it wasn't a riot, it was a complete massacre, where you see successful Black communities who have figured out ways to navigate, figured out ways to be self-sustaining and self-sufficient, but were still destroyed when when whites crossed the line and still came in over unprovoked and destroyed what we had. Rosewood, Florida is another example of that. Wilmington, North Carolina, another example of that. And there were so many other Black Wall Streets that their narratives and their stories have not been told. So we understand how ugly, how racism, how it exists everywhere. Throughout history and everywhere in our system. And that's why we can fast forward back to today, how we continue to relive in history is, we're looking at white supremacy and we're looking at racism translate through our police departments, but is the police the issue? It's the structures that's the issue.
JP, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's spot on. It's absolutely correct that you had self-sufficient African-American communities that were completely massacred. I think it's called Rosewood in Florida was also, and that's the thing, and bring back historical figures like Booker T. Washington versus W.B. Du Bois. And Brian very much knows that historical debate between them. But, Booker T. Washington was the guy at the turn of the 20th century who wanted to make African Americans more self-sufficient because he knew what slavery was. Whereas Du Bois grew up, in the northern and up north, didn't have that same experience. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, but believed that African Americans should have civil rights right away. So, and like he said, there's so many egregious examples of that self-sufficiency being taken away or being undermined, and it's just generations and generations through Jim Crow or the Black Codes, and in many ways that slavery continued after the Civil War, after Reconstruction, through sharecropping in the South, through the chain gangs in the South, and through Jim Crow, which was not only in the South, but throughout the United States. So,
all right. So
Absolutely.
let's. Go ahead. Go ahead, Brian.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, you're good. You're good.
Well, I was just going to shift gears, but I think you've got something valid here. Go ahead.
No, I was just definitely going to echo the same thing that that John just expressed. Whenever we try to make progress as Black people in this country, that the rules always change on us, and white supremacy always makes sure that it makes itself known to inhibit our success. Which kind of dispels and completely dismantles that whole concept and philosophy of lift yourself up by your bootstrap. which I do understand, and I do understand about making choices and working hard and so forth. But yet, there are so many barriers that are so entrenched within our systems here in this country that inhibit us from moving forward. And even when we find ways to navigate and move around those systems and those barriers and find a success, racism plays out in another shape, form, or fashion, which is the ultimate and the most deadliest way, the most fatal way, is that, completely it massacres us.
So, of course, we're talking on a small independent platform. This is not mass media, and of course, the show airs on one domain that says stop mass media. And we talked about the narratives that get run through mass media. So, can we then shift gear and imply or talk about Antifa? So there's been various reports of bricks being staged, and this anti-fascist group that I think has a more of its U.S. roots, because I think this is something from Germany that from the 80s that went into the U.K. and came into the U.S. At least what I'm reading online in the past 15 years. Are these reports that Antifa is directly involved in stoking these fires? Are either one of you, are you seeing that this is valid? Is this anti-fascist group that deliberately tries to provoke violence? Is this a reality?
Yeah, and I think it's smoke and mirrors. Okay, I think that's a way of cover for people who want to, maintain the white supremacist narrative. Okay, so if you look at what happened in Charleston, the police just stood around, and I'm talking about Charleston, Virginia, and you had all the white supremacists there, and and not to get political, but who talks about like getting through the smoke and mirrors was Malcolm X, and Brian can probably talk more about this, but it really was Malcolm X who was the voice, like, to get through the nonsense, and I think that the whole Antifa discussion is nonsense to me. That's my personal perspective, but from what I've read, I just think that's smoke and mirrors.
Brian, go for it.
I'm sorry. No, you were saying?
No, I was just going to ask you, what is the nonsense? What's going on in regards to the smoke and mirrors from your view?
My viewpoint is this, and one of my boys kind of posted something on social media right today, and it was kind of comedic in a way, but also a reality in a way, and it kind of goes back to a film, right? Spike Lee created a film back in, I think, like 89 or something like that, called Do the Right Thing.
Sure.
Right? And we, at the end of the film, there was a part about a character, Mookie, played by Spike Lee, when he threw a garbage can through the window of the pizzeria Sal's that he worked at, right? And we always were left like, why did he do that?
Extra cheese, 50 cents.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. But we kind of forget the whole thing of, like, why was Radio Raheem killed, right? That was what the meme that he put on Facebook. So when we talk about smoke and mirrors, we're talking about the violence. We're looking at the looting. We're looking at what they're labeling rioting. We're looking at all these staging of bricks and all this kind of stuff to distract us from the issue. What is the issue that we're fighting for here? What is the issue what created all of this? What is the sickness? What is the root cause? We're always looking at symptoms of a sickness, but we're never addressing the sickness. All of this kind of took place and kind of spiraled completely out of control, because yet we're still dealing with the same issue. And I don't want to keep saying this word, but saying this phrase, white supremacy, racism, that we're continually trying to fight within our systems and structures, that is completely playing itself out. Because you know what's going to happen if we don't treat the sickness? We're going to see this illness play itself out again. Give it a year or two. Matter of fact, next week, next month, we're going to see the same thing happen. It is until we treat and address the actual issue itself and not the symptoms of the issue that we're not going to see any real change happen. So yes, the media and all the narratives are going to be controlled to create these smoke and mirrors, and we're examining all of these distractions that surround the actual issue.
JP.
Yeah, that's exactly it, Ian. The Antifa thing is played up because there's too much attention put on looting, and there was too much attention put on this Antifa stuff. And I want to get political with the president, but that was that. And the National Security Advisor, O'Neill, said it was bad apple cops. It's just not bad apple cops. It's a systemic thing. And like Brian just said, it'll happen again if we don't address these issues. And, Martin Luther King also said that looting was the way the voiceless gets to express, because it's really difficult to fight this white supremacy and racism. And so, but most of the demonstrations were peaceful. And I think that people just want this like whole systemic change. It's not just the policing. And the reason why I brought up the whole smoke and mirrors thing is because, going back to Noam Chomsky about manufactured consent, the media can manufacture a narrative and shove it to the public and make the public accept it. And it's not necessarily a true narrative, or it's not necessarily a critically thought out narrative, right? And, voices like Cornel West and other people who are real intellectuals who really think about these issues kind of get drowned out sometimes. So that's what I would say about that.
So we've got one of the prominent African-American music groups, these early rappers, NWA, and they've got, one of their famous songs is F the Police. And, that's back in the 80s, I think it was, and so certainly from the African-American community, we've already kind of addressed this, given boots, and then those boots in many cases are taken away. So is this root, if we're able to identify a root here, is the root race, or is it social economics? Brian, what do you think?
No, I think it's race. Because even if you kind of start dividing America into classes, right? We look at poor, we look at the middle class, we look at the rich, right? Whatever class that we fall in as a middle class African American or black person, or even a poor black person, that we're still disadvantaged to our white counterparts in each class, within each class. Wealthy or wealthy black people are still lagging behind other wealthy white people. So it's very, if we start, really dig into history, and John can, has a strong expertise in history, is that social economics is a result of policies, that have been instituted, that have been predicated on race, and when you look at our history in America, from colonial America all the way through the foundations of America after the Revolutionary Wars, fast forward into now, there has been very specific policy that has been put in place and created by our government that has called out race in it. As a white man, I can own land. And as a black person, I can't live here. I can't own here. I can't get a loan because I'm black. I can't go to this school because I'm black. So it's been explicitly spelled out using race. Matter of fact, race itself, the whole concept, the social construct that we know as race, has been something that was created as a result at the very beginning and in inception of this country to benefit white people. So yes, social economics is a factor, but race is really the bottom line, and social economics is a result of racist policies.
So I can't personally imagine stomping my foot in some guy's throat and him screaming at me, "I can't breathe," and just ignoring him, and of course causing death. I regardless of the color of that person, just being a human being, I can't even fathom that act of me personally doing that. I mean, the guys can't even defend himself, and you're suffocating him, unfortunately, to death. So JP, let's talk about change and how we can change moving forward. Regardless of, like you say, regardless of how you fall politically, we've got a commander in chief. Just so happens that Dr. Bandy Lee will be joining us coming up here in about 15 minutes. We'll have to cut short here with the two of you, but she's written a book that perhaps the two of you may be familiar with. It's called The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. She happens to be Asian American, from I think she was born in Brooklyn, somewhere in New York, and she's a psychiatrist by training. She just says that this commander-in-chief that we have is mentally unstable and incompetent of directing a nation. Well, we're stuck with him. We're at least stuck with him for a few months, for more months. So how do we change moving forward? And certainly, regardless of who becomes the next president of the union, if we can keep it together peacefully. Keeping it together seems like it's, unfortunately I'm saying that, but we've got issues here. How do we change moving forward? Let's start with JP, and then I want to hand it off to Brian. How do we change moving forward?
Well, several things. I mean, first of all, you federally at the federal level regulate policing, and they don't need to be as militarized as they are, Brian, number one. I mean, Ian, number one.
Yep.
And then, there's a whole list of things that need to be addressed. Cornel West talks about a fair distribution of wealth, having the ability to not be discriminated in housing and education and other things. These things were addressed, 55 years ago, 56 years ago. LBJ also had a war on poverty. I mean, I don't think there's not going to be really much of a change until the next presidency, if there's a change in the presidency, but we can't wait that long, really. I mean, will there be enough pressure put on the U.S. Congress to do certain things in society where, the whole role of policing changes? My cousin just retired from the Minneapolis police force, and he's Native American, adopted, and I don't know. There's a lot to discuss there, and it would really take more than a couple minutes. I really want Brian to chime in, but Sam Cooke had a song, "A Change Is Gonna Come," and whether the powers that be like it or not, the system is untenable the way it is because I think it's very fragile, and I think obviously our democracy is very fragile.
Right.
If the status quo tries to continue, and I don't think that it can.
And before you speak, Brian, I want to insert: is the democracy even working? What needs to change in that regard to root out, as you'd mentioned, JP, some of this corruption that's fairly deep in this system? Brian, take it away.
I'm going to try to make sense here because I have so many emotions as far as how do we move forward and so many thoughts and sentiments, right? But I'm going to start out at the most basic sentiments. How do we move forward? First thing we need to do, and a lot of people don't understand it implicitly that we have done this, and subconsciously we did that we've done something to the humanity of Black people in this country, that we have not even recognized it and identified it, even validated our humanity in this country. So we need to start there, first of all. When I say validating in our humanity, we're not even, when you talk about the classification of race, that even back in that classification, when they start placing labels on people, that we weren't even placed on that label on an equal footing as a human being, first of all. We were some kind of subspecies of human being. Yeah. So therefore, subconsciously, we're still living with that. We're still living with it that a police officer can sit on the neck of someone without no retribution and without just sitting there emotionally. Last time I got in a fight, I may have been like 15 years old, and I hit a kid in the face, and I saw him hurt. That bothered me, and I went to apologize almost immediately that I can do that to another human being. So our very humanity has to be validated. We're demonized, especially as Black men in this country. We've been completely demonized. If you go back to the history of lynchings and so forth and really look at the root causes of why those took place and what took place during the lynching and just the dehumanization right there, we're completely demonized. We're always generalized in media through perception. And it's even taught in our schools that our humanity is not even validated in our curriculum. So we're talking about police violence, but look at the curriculum violence that is taking place in our schools. when it comes to Black lives, that we're not even teaching to it. Right now, when we scream Black Lives Matter, then you have a counterpart that wants to say all lives matter, blue lives matter. And me saying Black Lives Matter does not take away from any other life. Just if I say I love Black children, I love Black people, does not mean I hate you. That's not what I mean. So back to my original point is that we need to start through the basic validation and just identifying just our equality and just our presence within humanity, which has never been validated throughout history and in our society.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point, and it almost brings tears to my eyes because you look at the contributions from African American, Americans, if you will. Some of the greatest athletes, Michael Jordan. I mean, Michael Jackson, Michael Jordan. It goes on and on. You're looking at the contributions, and even scholastically, as you're mentioning, Cornel West, JP. It brings tears to my eyes that this type of behavior continues to plague the progress of this country. I want to go JP and then Brian. Go ahead.
Just real quick, I just want to say one thing. I don't mean to cut you off. And you did mention our contributions through entertainment, through sports, and all that is amazing. And also even some of our scholastic contributions. But when we start having those conversations about contributions of Black people and people of the African diaspora overall, our contributions are far-fetching to the very beginning of civilization. We're talking about contributions to science, medicine. Right now I can get a blood transfusion because it's a Black man who did that. Matter of fact, look at just the architecture. We're talking about architects of the pyramids. Those were Black people who did that. Those weren't Hebrew enslaved Hebrews who did that. We're talking about, let's take some basic right now. Have my lights on. Yes, Thomas Edison helped develop that, but yes, the filament of the light bulb was a Black man named Louis Latimer. And that list can go on where, we need to celebrate the contributions of Black people along with white people as well. Whenever I go into schools and I teach that these contributions, and the list is extensive of the contributions and also the things that originated from Black people that we enjoy every day and that we have every day in our life. And I'm not trying to take away from anything that European people have contributed or Asian people or Hispanic, Latino people. We're talking about how we come to our society and civilization. It came into existence through the amalgamation and the contributions of all people, and specifically in this spaces that we're talking about Black people.
Yeah, beautifully said, Brian. Thanks for bringing that up, JP. Some closing comments from you, and we may need to make this a part two. Let's give this a little bit of time because I feel like we're just kind of starting heating up, and unfortunately I've got to close out. But JP, some closing comments from you, and then Brian, some closing comments from you, sir.
Yeah, I'll be quick, and I want Brian to close out. I just want to follow up with what Brian was saying is that we're dealing with a legacy of colonialism, and what I mean by that is this country was built on genocide of Native Americans and the dehumanization of African peoples, and this dehumanization is genocide talk, and it happened all over the world with colonialism, and unfortunately it happened here in a uniquely and horrific and awful way, and we're still dealing with it today, as Brian says, and the legacy is still with us. And when he saw that policeman, kneel on Mr. Floyd's neck, it was like his humanity was taken away. He was an animal to that policeman, it seemed like, and that is, I mean, the pictures say that everything with that person's look in his eyes, it's the legacy of genocide, and that's still with us. And until we can address that as humanity, until we can humanize who we are, until we realize that, we're all more similar than unlike,
right.
With phenotype versus genotype. And that says everything. And Brian's absolutely right.
Brian, some closing comments and thoughts from you, sir.
I'm just going to close out in summation of some of the things that I said. First of all, this current fight they're in is not a fight between, black people and police. It's just the people versus the police department. It's a fight against the people and injustice, and white supremacy and racism. If we want to kind of try to move forward past this, it's not going to only take just a shift in leadership that's going to change anything, but it's going to be a shift in mindset and a shift in perception, a shift in narratives. We need to change education first, and
right.
how our children are being educated, that we understand and we can develop an understanding of each other. And also, we need to start with a validation of the very humanity of black people.
Wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, Brian Knowles joining us from West Palm Beach and JP Linstroth. Gentlemen, thank you for joining Discuss Your Truth. I look forward to keeping in touch with you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me so much. Thank you.
So, a little bit of technical issues there, some technical difficulties to start that out, but we came together. That was there were some pretty nice things addressed there. Wonderful contributions from Brian, who, of course, genetically identifies with the African American community, and certainly, well, look, we all are human beings here, all of us. So it's disgusting that this is a reality in the United States in 2020. I find it appalling, frankly, and it is what it is. So we again, I think, need to address concerns regarding the validity of this democracy. Is it a healthy democracy? How do we root out the corruption? Where is the corruption coming from? How do we move past some of these race, gender, even the gender is a major fight as well. Socioeconomic discrepancies. How do we get past that so that everyone's voice is heard and identified? And hey, get out and vote. I urge you not to take sides politically. I think both parties are corrupt. Look at the fact that you are an American if you're in this country. If you're elsewhere, stand up for your beliefs there. But in the United States, stand up for being an American and stand up for preserving that Constitution that you have inherited. And this has been another Discuss Your Truth. I'll be back in a few moments with Dr. Bandy X. Lee. Thank you for listening. This is Ian Hamilton Trottier. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, INTROTTIER. Until next discussion, folks, be awesome.